Olá, pessoal, boa tarde. Começando aqui, primeiro em português, lógico, né? O pessoal daqui que deve estar aí aguardando. Sejam bem-vindos mais uma vez aqui ao nosso canal. Hoje um dia bastante especial aqui para mim, estou muito feliz. Finalmente, depois de muita luta, a gente conseguiu aí alinhar a agenda. Eu e meu querido amigo Gustaw Dudek está aqui comigo hoje. O Gustaw, na minha modesta opinião, é o principal profissional de DataViz no mundo hoje. É o profissional mais influente no mundo, um verdadeiro artista, ok? Então, eu estou muito feliz de poder trazer ele aqui para fazer um webinário com a gente, fazer uma demonstração. Já deixei ele livre aqui, ok? Para seguir no tempo dele, sem um horário para a gente poder acabar. Eu peço que todo mundo que está conseguindo acompanhar, que fiquem tranquilos, o vídeo vai ficar gravado, vai ficar disponível no canal aqui para rever quantas vezes todos quiserem, tá? E eu vou pedir somente que, lógico, vocês utilizem aí o chat para nos dar um feedback, se o áudio tá bom, se o vídeo tá bom, ok? Se vocês estão conseguindo nos ouvir tranquilamente, se vocês estão conseguindo ver tranquilamente, utilizem o chat para deixar suas perguntas, tá? E eu espero que vocês tirem aí o melhor proveito possível, tá? Desse evento aqui hoje. O Gustavo está dando aí, obrigado, Gustavo, do feedback, tá? Que bom. Ajuda aí nesse sentido. Então, façam utilização, aproveitem, tá? O máximo que vocês puderem, beleza? Hi, everyone. I'm Hugo Venturini from Brazil. I'm MVP Microsoft Data Platform category. This is my channel. And here I talk a lot about Power BI, Excel, Power Query, Power Pivot, and many other things. You all are welcome. All the content on my channel is in Portuguese, obviously, but today is a very special day because I have here my dear friend Gustaw Dudek from Poland, the most influential professional of data visualization in the world today. I ask you that you use the chat to tell us where are you from and let your questions about the content we have today. Gustav, the stage is yours.
Thank you very much. So first of all, it's really great to be here. Thank you very much for the invitation, Hugo. It's super occasion to meet you eventually, like on live even, and not only through the LinkedIn, but like in reality. So that's really great. And of course, good afternoon and good evening, depending on where you are currently, speaking to the broader audience. So great to meet you, all of you. And I will talk a little bit about myself after launching the presentation. So I will start presenting, and Hugo, please let me know if everything is visible well enough.
All right.
All good? Thank you. So basically, we will be talking today about building Power BI reports in general, but in reality, I would like to share a few points for consideration, especially in terms of the front-end development. Of course, there is a very huge, very broad subject, so I would only like to point a few ones that maybe, hopefully, some of them will be useful for you and for us collaboratively. So I would also like to point that I will be talking also a few words about maybe the first party visualization and about different persons' works, etc. But I do not have any affiliations, program associations with any of them. So everything I will be talking and sharing with you only is based on my expertise and experience with specific third parties, visualization and different functionalities that I will be talking today. Briefly speaking, what we will discuss is shown here, And a few major points that I would like to share with you today is first, I would like to share a few information about the source of knowledge and inspiration in general, because I think it's quite relevant to know what are the sources, what are the amazing people that are around us and share a lot of different knowledge in different fields. So I would like to share that with you. Then I would like to present a very brief list of relevant Power BI functionalities that for my, as a Power BI and developer, a front-end developer, might be relevant in terms of the career, of the improvement of our own skills in the Power BI in general. And of course, I would like to show you a few sample report structures, and we will walk through different examples, think about how we can structure that, and I will mainly focus on my thought process, etc., just to share what is my head during the conceptual work, during happening, etc. And if we will have enough time, I would like to show you a few different KPI card layouts, because I was working a lot of different KPI cards recently, so I will be very happy to share a few examples with you. Before I will go to the presentation, for those of you who don't know me yet, I'm Gustaw from Poland. I work for the Polish company as a head of business intelligence for the company in Ontario. I'm also the Microsoft Power BI community representative, which is led by the Myers. I am also privileged to be an enterprise DNA platform expert and also the IBCS certified analyst. And on top of that, I'm also I can consider myself as a content creator because I like to share a lot of different tips through the LinkedIn. At that moment, only the LinkedIn. I have a plan to run different initiatives broader than only the LinkedIn, but for that moment, I only create content through the LinkedIn. Going to the presentation, I only would like to say that my main field that I would like to present you is basically related, of course, with the front end, because it's my main expertise in the Power BI, in those scopes. And I mainly focus on creating live themed business reports. So it's in my scope of the reports that I've already done. The most of them are, of course, the business-wise reports. There are only selected ones that are presented here, as you can see now. And of course, I also, maybe you already seen some of them, I also created a few dark theme reports more for the showcase purposes, as the Formula One, for example, on the top left, or the analysis of the YouTube on the Enterprise DNA channel, etc. So there are plenty of dark theme reports that I also created for different challenges and contests. But what I really like to do, and what is my main objective and the field of improvement, is the live theme reports. And I would like to share a few considerations with you today. So going to the part one, the source of knowledge and inspiration. Maybe it's a typical topic for the start point of the presentation, but it's really important for me to give a specific shout out to different people, and also to share an information with you of who can spread a really valuable knowledge in the different domains. So speaking about the source of knowledge inspiration, I personally found the three major pillars. The first one is the DataViz sources, but non-Power BI specific. I mean that from my perspective, it's really important to gather the very general knowledge, not necessarily related with the Power BI itself. Then we have the community, which of course we can see, for example, through the LinkedIn, maybe through other platforms like YouTube, etc. And we have also the platforms, also non-Power BI specific, because it's related with the Pinterest, Dribble, etc. So there are no showcase of Power BI work. In general, there are rather related to the Tableau or app-based application, etc., not related with the Power BI. So these are the three main pillars that I would like to distinguish for the purpose of our presentation. Let's focus on the first one, which is the data resources, non-Power BI specific. I would like to show you the four main personalities that I would like to recommend, because from my perspective, I've read a lot of materials and resources from that specific people, and for me personally is the entire full foundation of the of the knowledge that I can incorporate to the reports. So without any particular order, there will be like Dr. Rolf, future professor, and Dr. Jürgen Feist from the IBCS. We have the Nick Debra from the practical charts, Steve Wexler from data revelations, and Cole Newsbauer, nothing. I'm really sorry if I didn't pronounce it correctly, from the storytelling with data. So very important for positions for me personal. So here we have Dr. Rolf Fichert and Dr. Jürgen Feist from the IBCS. We have Nick Debra here and a few phenomenal books he wrote and published. We have the Steve Wexler with very phenomenal and very well-known 2 books. He was a co-author of that particular book. And Cole Newsbauer with the storytelling data. That's probably one of the most popular book, but it's like must-have for any data analyst and front-end developer. Then we can go to the community side. So there are a lot of people, Power BI related, who share on a daily basis a very valuable knowledge. So only by looking at their work, there is a high probability that we improve our skill set and our tool set in general. And I will distinguish a few main bullet points here. I distinguish the community work on different pillars. My individual perspective on that is like the general Power BI, like very broad aspects, not specifically related to the data visualization, but the greater one. Then we have the data visualization related information and resources. We have the DAX, Power Query, and other. So going to the specific domains, we have general Power BI knowledge. So these are people who have a very broad knowledge and share information regarding the different aspects of Power BI. So we have the Brian Julius, we have the Kurt Entry from Knowledge Bank, very good channel, YouTube channel. Inji, very well known. Chandik, of course. Ruth and Reed, I'm sorry. So I assume that you already know a lot of them, but big shout out to these people, of course. Then we have the data visualization field, and some names that I would like to highlight here is Alexandru, Miguel, Carlos, Claudio, Armand, Sean, Gerard, and Andre. These are the people who are whose skills are very valuable in terms of data visualization, and these people are like the role models for anything we can do and achieve in Power BI. And not necessarily only in Power BI, but also in different data visualization tools, and even in Excel, as for example, Carlos Barbosa frequently showcases capabilities and different visualization using the Excel. So these are my way to go, people, in terms of data visualization. If you would like to improve your skills in an SVG implementation through the matrix, for example, or the card, Daniel, Kerry, and Bert are the people, from my perspective, to go if you would like to improve the skill set in the SVG. In terms of the DANEP, Daniel, Greg, Kerry, David, Imran, Madison, Andrzej, Ben, Joseph. Then we have maps. If you'd like to improve your maps, search anything from Paul Lucason. If you'd like to create better paginated reports, search for Sue. And if you would like to improve your calculations groups, I think the Bernard and the Parvinder are phenomenal materials, resources on specific on the calculation groups. Of course, also on the different topics, but I remember the times where I wanted to improve my skills in the calculation groups, and their resources and YouTubes and blogs are extremely helpful. In terms of the DAX and Power Query, Brian, Melissa, Rick, SQL BI with the Marcus, Alberto Ferrari, Greg, Sam, Chandik, and Andrews. So as you see, some names can overlap through the different fields, but these are general people way to go. And of course, a big shout out to you, Hugo, for your historical amazing reports that you also developed some time ago. I remember them, so you can't be, you just have to be shown here as well, because it was quite inspirational. So thank you also for your contribution to the community. And these are, of course, two of your examples from your previously done.
Amazing, man. This green one is different now. I modified it. Thank you.
I'm sure you already upgraded both of these one with your improved skill set, but these were phenomenal at that point of time. And the third pillar from the source of knowledge and inspiration is additional platforms like Dribble and Pinterest. And I would like to say that this particular field is the most tricky one, because we can say that there are no many Power BI reports, which might be a good thing, because there are different examples of the Power BI, sorry, not Power BI, but the different web app applications, etc., which might look good. However, we have to consider that not everything we can see on Pinterest, on a Dribble, is actually a good example of how the data should be structured and how data should be displayed. So I'm saying that I generally recommend to go to the Pinterest or Dribble because it's also my way to go, but we have to be conscious at what we are looking for. And my general idea here is just to browsing for different reports, different dashboards, but try to spot a single different things across different reports that might look very attractive or might seem to be practical. And that's my approach here. So when I'm searching for a new inspiration, because I feel like all my current ideas are already like limited to some extent, because what I currently know was used to some extent, and I just need to expand my knowledge and my creativity. I go to Pinterest Dribble to search for a new inspiration, and it works well so far. But we have to be careful at what we are looking for, and we have to be very selective in that case. It's just a few examples. I don't want to dive too much into the specific visualization I'm showing it today now. I just wanted to show a few examples that appear on my personal account, and it sounds and it seems like a quite interesting way of visualizing data, and I would like to take some inspiration out of those examples. So that one might, for example, show the KPI cards with the big callout values and additional timelines. It looks generally very fine to my eye, and I would like to, for example, create a LinkedIn reports for my personal usage, maybe taking inspiration of how it's structured here, because I really like the layout. Then we have a different layout. I'm really sorry because the quality of the particular screen is not good, so I apologize for that, but we can just get a general idea behind the dashboard. There might be one specific element that caught your attention, for example, like the timeline charts with the highlighted last periods, for example, or different charts, maybe the KPI presentation. There might be some specific elements that are important to you and you can consider to incorporate in your own. Here, for example, we can take an inspiration of how the borders, how the specific sections are structured. We have like the callout values, we have the labels, we have the like the spark line in that chart, and in that case, and summarization, the aggregated data in the form of the top at the bottom. So it's like the general idea of how we can structure our. Of course, it's only a single scope, a very tiny piece of the broader puzzle, but we can take some inspiration out of that. Here's, for example, the entire report based on specific industries, maybe specific analytics. But what I like about that one is, for example, how it's once again how it's structured, how we can place the slicer, the searches, the titles, how we can structure the report. For example, there is a distinguished section on the right side. I'm not saying that every report has to have exactly the same structure, but looking holistically at that particular report, I think I could take some relevant information of these lines. The same here, a small, simple card, but we can take some inspiration. There is a specific look of the slicer, for example, the callout values, there is the divider, etc. It looks generally clean, so maybe it will be the inspiration for the future development of API cards. The same here, additional slicer, additional callout with the, let's say, variances. I'm not particularly interested in what is exactly shown here, but the way of how it's structured, it also gives me some ideas of how can I implement the KPI cards in the Power BI, for example, depending on the needs, depending on the analysis. Some additional layouts of the tables, which might be doable with the SVG if there will be such need for specific end clients or for my own usage to incorporate such styles. But it's quite unique. Maybe it's interesting. Same here. Nice chart with the specific points selected, the specific points highlighted on the chart. So it's like the very, very minor, small things that might look great and might extend our creativity in general. For example, that one, it's not related with the Power BI, but when I look at that particular example, I think about the synoptic panel where, for example, if you have to create a report for the healthcare industry or fitness industry, you might be able to utilize the custom visualization synoptic panel to create similar visualization of the report. So it's still as an inspirational content.
I have a work like this with synoptic.
Sounds great. And how's that work?
Awesome. That's awesome.
I hear you, and I believe so. Never used it before, but looking at what some people can create with synoptic panel, I think it might be very beneficial. So last but not least, if you would like to take a look at my personal content, because maybe you already knew the content, had a chance to look at it, I would like to say how you can utilize my so-called LinkedIn content library report, because not everyone is aware of the fact that I published the published web version of the report, which contains all of my pieces of content. So if you go to the LinkedIn and you go to the features section of my profile, you can see that it's almost always on the top, because I was always trying to push that on the top, so it's always visible for you. So depending on whether you use the mobile phones or the computer, laptops, etc., you might be directed to the additional view, which looks like that, and you have to then click to view, because you either are directly navigated to the Power BI, but if it doesn't work that way, you can click view here, and it should be directed to the LinkedIn report. And actually, I have the embedded version in the PowerPoint. I just wanted to give you a very quick walkthrough of how you can utilize these reports in a more efficient way. And of course, we can simultaneously talk a little bit more about the report, so it's also valuable. So what can be valuable from your perspective? It's the small filter pane here, because those names are in a Poland version, because I have the Polish version of application in PowerPoint, so it's adjusted to the Polish one. But I will be describing at what you are looking at this moment. So now it's like the slicer with the format, and it's the details. So format, for example, you can pick the PDF, GIF, PNG, depending on what you like to see on my library report. You can select the details, yes, for example. So in that case, you will get only those posts that actually include some more detailed explanations. So if you're looking, for example, for some of my PDFs, which can be downloadable from the LinkedIn, you can of course pick the PDF, mark the details as yes, and now you can see only those particular pieces of content that include the more detailed breakdown. What can be also important is the two views. One is the compressed, one is extended. This one is extended, and it's probably will be the most beneficial for you. But the compressed is like the collapsing the table to make it. It's like only the half of the page vertically, and you get the information additional from the different charts. But it's more like the analytical stuff. But if you would like to navigate yourself to the specific sections, you probably want to have the extended table, and you can sort the items by release date. So now we see that the most up-to-date are at the top. I will erase all the filters, so it's more visible. I didn't update it recently, so it's like the 14th of the September right now, but I will update it. So it's like the release date. The release date can be either from the the newest one or the oldest one if we use the cursor in the right section. And if not the release date, we can also use the sorting by the views, for example. So now it's like the descending order with the views or descending order by the reactions or the ratio reactions to the views. But I think that release date should be the most important one because you can get the information, get the access to the newest one. And there is an important feature which is the search filter, which enables you to insert a specific phrase. So let's say that you would like to dive more into the granularity. So if you type granularity and possibly go to the details section, you can see that you can find the 3 different posts that I will describe in more details through the link. So if you click one of them, you can see that you will be directed to the LinkedIn, and you can see the description along with the PDF, and the PDF can be downloadable. So you can just download that and you can use it wherever you want. In this particular case, I'm describing how we can implement the master table with the granularity, which control every field parameters, which gives you the different access to different granularities. So from my perspective, it's also very valuable information how we can do that because it's a powerful technique that can be utilized in many ways. So in that case, we get a quick access to this particular breakdown. And of course, you can use the LinkedIn report searching for different things like the conditional formatting or the field parameters, etc., etc., etc. So I really hope that the few basic guidelines and steps that you can use in this particular report make it a bit more user friendly and gives you a bit of an overall view of how it can be used. So coming back to the presentation, here's a relevant list of the Power BI related functionalities. And from my personal perspective, it's mostly related, of course, with the front end because we are talking about the front end today. But I think that if I would like to create additional presentations for you, for example, those will be the main fields of the front end development that I would like to be more skilled and I would like to improve on in those areas because I saw that these are like some of the keys to create better storytelling in reports and to structure them in a better way. So let's go quickly through the list. We have the general database benchmarks and rules. So it's related, for example, from whatever the grass set or the IPCS or system. These are like the general ideas of what are the good practices, what are the bad practices, and it's not actually important whether we use it as in Power BI. It might be like in a different visualization. The tool is only the tool, but the most important is how we can perceive and how we can basically notice the best part, the good practices and the bad practices. How we can interpret the KPIs and metrics, which we would like to incorporate on the Power BI. So these are like the fundamentals. We have to know which KPIs we would like to include and how to display them in the most appropriate way. Then it's also good to master in quotation the report structure, how we can prepare the layout, how we can select the charts, very important, how we can use a different UI components like the navigation slicer, etc. There are also specific Power BI functionalities which are, from my perspective, universally useful. These are like the conditional formatting and the field parameters, for example. These are very important and very broad aspects of the Power BI. You can set a lot of different functionalities and set a lot of different visualization based on conditional formatting and utilizing field parameters. Very important thing for the front end developer. Then we have to think about the interaction and slicer synchronization because how the specific visualization interact with each other on the report page is very crucial. Then we have dynamic text. It's also important because it gives a bit better user experience because we inform the end user what are the selected elements, what are the charts, what they are displaying. So generally the text, and then they can be also dynamic depending on the slicer search, etc. So it's good to know a few things about how we can make it dynamic. Then we have the bookmarks. Of course, some people hate bookmarks, some people like bookmarks, but the general idea is here just to make at least the basic knowledge of how to set the navigation, how to view changes, if that's important, how to create a drill through. Drill through is not specifically related with the bookmark itself, so I should show that as a different bullet points on the list, but you get the idea of looking for the information, how to create the bookmarks and the drill through. Dynamic formats can be also very important. Maybe it's not like the crucial and game changer here because it's like the additional element, additional functionality, but it also can enhance the user experience by using the different, the specific data labels, etc. In terms of the building a good visualization, it's important to use specific format, and dynamic formats can enhance it. Then we have the chart enhancement and design enhancement. So once again, we are talking about the chart selection, but from my perspective, chart selection is the first point, but there's also the chart enhancement. It's not the same because from one hand, we should know which chart we should use. And after that, if you already know which chart probably would work best in our case, it's good to know how to enhance the chart. Of course, depending on the taking some factors into consideration, like the factor, like the performance, like the budget for specific report, etc. But there are specific enhancements that can be incorporated to make the storytelling more important. Design enhancement, the same, how to design specific elements to make it more user experience friendly, and other things like how to create a powerful calendar table, for example, as Melissa the court suggests. Maybe also the use of the calculation groups. It's all related with the front end at the end of the day, because how we can structure or how we use our DAX and the calculation groups also impact the interactivities and different functionalities across the report page. So those are the fields that are really important to me personally, and I think it might be very beneficial to upskill them in order to create better front end work. Now we would like to dive more into the, let's say, the first part, which is the report structure, and I would like to share a few points of consideration when creating the report structure. So these are the basic components that, depending on the type of the report we are dealing with, we might have a different reports, let's say the executive types or analytical types. There are many different categorizations, but depending on the two factors, we don't always have to use all of the points, all of the information that you are already here on the screen. So it's like the broader list of different elements that can be utilized on report pages, but you don't necessarily have to use all of them. It all depends on a few factors, but we will dive a little bit more into that in a second. So basically, in order to create a report that has a specific structure, the specific storytelling, specific narrative, like here and here, it's very crucial to know which elements we should consider before we even start creating the report. Things like how the structure, how to use the filters, how to use the navigation, how to choose specific words, etc. It's all important and will result with the specific work front end development. So let's say we have the two reports. These are like the mock-up versions. So it's not the specific reports built in Power BI, it's like the mock-up version of how the report can look like. And let's assume that the first one in the background, that one is more analytical type, which might include more slicers, more deep dive data, so it's structured in a bit different way. However, it's still similar in that case, that one, but let's say it's the more like the overview type. Let's say the specific client that would like to get this particular report rather require to have a little bit less selectable options, because selectable options like the field parameters, a lot of slicers, a lot of bookmarks, etc., might be very useful for the analytical reports when the data analysts have to dive into the specific area. But on the overview pages, we often would like to have the least possible amount of the slicers, for example, and different selectable options, just to make an insight at the first glance. So we have to always consider with which type of report and which answers we would like to provide for the reports, and it impacts of how we can structure that. So coming back to the page components that I showed you a few moments ago, we have like the broader elements, but now we focus only on the text. And I will show you a few examples of what I think about specific elements. Titles, subtitles, either from the page, like we have the new page in the Power BI, we have the name of that page, we have the subheader, etc. So it's like some kind form of the text, which is often utilized because we have to have the page header, probably also the subheader with additional information, etc. Might be not in every case, we might have like the username. Sometimes it's utilized in personal Power BI reports on some specific fields, or in some specific fields where we would like to welcome specific users, so welcome, etc., etc., etc. But it's not a game changer. If it's required, of course, we can use that. But I also listed, I included into the list under the text categories, but it's not very frequently used. This from my perspective. We have the dim selections, for example. We might have additional KPI cards usage or the small narratives or a few additional methods to display what filters are selected. It's not also the game changer. It's not that it has to be implemented in each report. It might improve the general storytelling, the user experience, but it has to be strategically used. Not in every report, because there are pros and cons. There is a case of the maintenance of the report by the clients, etc. But in some cases, it's very user-friendly, very practical. We might have additional information about the dates, what is the date refresh of the report, what is the selected date, etc., and some kind of the guidelines and tooltips in many other forms, maybe as the over effect or maybe additional guidelines, etc. It all comes to the textual information, textual pieces of content in the report. Then we have the navigation. Navigation may consist from several points. Of course, it's amongst other things. Let's say we have the main pages and main navigation, main sections. We might also have the additional points. Let's say it's an additional example of what I think. So we might have major sections like the page 1, page 2, page 3, page 4. Of course, it's like the placeholder. In your case, those pages will be called with specific names like the revenue, expenses, cash flow, HR, or whatever. But under each of those main sections, we also might have additional views. So maybe we are, let's say the page 3 is like the HR analysis, but we might have additional structures, different tables, different charts, different analysis by person, by role, by department, etc. And we might consider to add additional layers of the section, so-called subheaders. Of course, it's not the only way of incorporating main sections and subsections, but it's only an example. But the main idea is that if we think about the people structure, we might consider of how main sections you would like to incorporate, depending on the data set, depending on the requirements of the client, but also how many different additional views we might consider, how to place them, etc. We might also think about the drill-through buttons, etc. Drill-through buttons can be activated either by the on-hover mode or by using additional dedicated buttons, which will be activated through clicking on a specific drill-through category. We might have additional navigation like to the previous page or to the landing page. It can be set as here is only an example where you have additional buttons like the landing page, previous page guideline, and you might also have the clear filter button here. It's only an example. So these are all components that potentially can be incorporated, and depending on the report, we might think of how we would like to structure them, which should be important, which should be included, which should be excluded. And talking about the clearing filter button, I would like to share a few nuances, because it's like the minor thing, but if we are talking about the clearing filters, I would like to show you two different ways. There are more than two, but I would like to show you two. So the first one is using the built-in, like the native buttons, which is called clear all slice, which is available from some time. So let's say we use this one as our workshop, and we have the clear all slicers button implemented on our report page. And let's say that our report page is consisted of this particular slicer. We have the year slicer, month slicer, comparison. These are the single select. You might have some charts that gives you the ability to pick different metrics or different calculations, like the absolute variance, relative variance, etc. It's like the template, like the example of how we can approach that particular report with a specific use case. And we might have categorical slicer, like what is the filter sales manager, the sales location, customer type, product type, etc. As you can see, there are strategically selected some items just to give you an information about what will change. So if we
This
use
is amazing, man. I didn't see nothing like this before. It's amazing, amazing.
Thank you, I really appreciate it.
Fantastic.
So here we have implemented the clear slicer button, which is the native one. So you can see what will be the effect. So you can see that some specific single select slicers won't be affected by the native slicer selection. So it's pretty much okay functionality. However, what can be either valuable or maybe not is that clear all slicers work on all slicers which are multi-select. So in that case, the year and month also will be restored, the same metrics and calculations. In some cases, it will be advantageous, but I can imagine some scenarios when end user would like to pick some year, month, maybe some metrics calculations, but don't want to be interrupted by clear all filters. Maybe it should be like stay fixed, whatever the end user stays at the report page. Maybe he selected revenues and you'd like to fix that as revenues. Nothing should have to be changed after clicking the clear slicers, but it won't work that way with the natives, with the native button. And it's explained here. But the secondary, the alternative approach is to use bookmarks. So there are pros and cons because there are people who just don't like to use bookmarks. There are specific pros and cons, of course, but I would like to only show you some alternatives to the functionality. So we can leverage the bookmarks and click on specific slicers that would like to be affected by this particular bookmark. So in that case, we can click on categorical slicers that should be affected, it should be impacted. So sales manager, sales location, customer type, product type, it's all selected, like left click on this particular elements, objects. Then you go to the bookmark, set up the new bookmark, like clicking add, and we have to specify given elements, given options. So it's crucial that the data is turned on. There's like the small checkbox like sign here. The data has to be turned on. The current page probably also, but the selected visuals is the game changer here. So we only apply the bookmarks only to whatever was selected while updating the bookmark. So in that case, after we click the slicer button, which is now dependent on the bookmark, not created as a native one, we can see that the slicer will be only affected in those range which was clicked and selected. So now we can not interfere with year, month, metrics, calculations. It will stay strategically the same, but we only change the 4 on the bottom. So there are different methods, and depending on what is the context, what is our need and request, we can use different methods. Then we go to the different. I just ended the topic related with the clear selection button. We move on. So now we have the slicer selection. It's a very also broad topic. I distinguish a few of them. It's not like the general categorization of the slicer. It's my individual approach to that. We might have the date-related slicers, the functional, like the general, metric-related, and the categorical one. So let's say how we can specify, how we can think about different slicers. So let's say we take a look at the date-related slicers. And we have a few different approaches. In a financial reports, we often face with the situation when we don't want to create multi-select drop-down lists. For example, when you manually select different options, in many cases, often you would like to see the date as the period, as a border date. So you can single select, let's say the current month or only the September 24, and depending on those border date, many things should happen accordingly to those border dates. So let's say, show me on a chart like the previous 12 months correspondingly to the whatever what is selected as a max date. So is the first thing that we have to consider how we like to incorporate slicers and the whole logic behind the time intelligence functionalities. You might also have the time range, which is the pretty much the default one, which is the multi-select that I mentioned before. But actually, I showed a different example. So it's not like the multi-select here. The example here that I'm showing is like the date range, which gives you the short ability to show the year-to-date, full year, LTM, last 30 months, all periods, etc. For example, based on a current month or any other max date. It's only an example. You might have the different granularities. Let's say daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly, yearly. So we'd like to change what is the display on the x-axis on a chart or in a table when we present the timelines. It might be daily data, weekly, monthly, etc. It might be the dynamic. Not every client requires to have dynamic granularities. There are many situations where clients would rather stay with only a fixed, let's say, monthly or daily. It's not always the best to incorporate granularity as a dynamic function. It's not always needed. It always depends on the context and what is needed. In financials, there's oftentimes need to have like monthly, quarterly, for example, as a dynamic option, but it's not set in the standard. You might also have the different scenario, different comparisons. Sometimes you would like to use the comparison to previous year, sometimes to budget, sometimes to forecast, sometimes to previous month, etc., etc. Sometimes you might have a major metric on one specific report page, and we would like to control all the charts depending on the selection. So we would like to analyze maybe revenues, maybe only gross profit, maybe EBIT, etc. So these are important types of slicers, and also the logic behind those slicers that we have to think about when designing, for example, the financial report. And of course, we might have standard slicers like the product, customer, account type, business segment, depending on the data set, but these are pretty much straightforward. And of course, there are different types of the slicers. There are single slices, single select slicer, multi-select slicer, all important when building the dashboards. And here are just a few examples of how the new slicers can be designed. It's only an example. So that one, as you can see, incorporate additional checkboxes. So whatever is selected, there is also a small icon. However, it looks really great. Of course, for my personal, it doesn't have to be like objectively well looking, but I like the visual appealing of those slicers. However, recently I try to incorporate more slicers which are designed like here. So for example, with the additional bars, either as on the top line or maybe on the left as here. Because I think it's a little bit better in terms of maintenance, it's a little bit faster in terms of the implementation, because we don't have to play with additional icons. There's a bit less DAX, etc. So it's a little bit more convenient to create something like that. And from my perspective, it looks quite good comparing to the very default state of the slicers. So I'm only showing you a few different approaches of how we can design slicers, but I also would like to know that I'm recently more into simplistic one like here or here. Of course, there are dozens or different layouts, but these are only examples. And the final page component is in icons and images. Of course, it's a minor thing, but we might have company logo is maybe not a minor thing. It might be really relevant. And I also incorporate like here just to make you an information how the icon, the image can be incorporated. It might look the same on the report page. So you might have the company logo, maybe the button icons, and maybe different images depending on the report. And my current point of view on icons is that I'm quite neutral here. So I'm not saying that using icon is a game changer or not using icons is a game changer. I'm rather in the middle. I try to not incorporate icons in general, but I think there might be use cases where icons are quite fine. So for example, when we have the metrics and the metrics can be really related to one specific icon and it gives you an impression what are you looking at by looking at the icon, it might be quite good to incorporate them. For example, we have the landing page, previous page, guideline, which might also have the dedicated icon like as presented here, or maybe the clear button with such kind of icon. It's pretty much straightforward. It's quite understandable for the end user. So I think it might be like neutral to incorporate them. I wouldn't avoid them, but I try to use them very carefully. And also what I would like to point is that we should try to use only either outline or only either field icons. So if we decide to go the outline versions, like here, you can see that the outline builds the icon and not the field. So either we go with the outline or either with the field to keep that consistency across different icons across the report page. For example, that one, I would say that it's more like the field type of icon, because it's like the field. It's not the border which constitutes the icon. So we have to decide either outline, either field, solid, and we have to be consistent across the report page. And this is a presentation of the mockup version, is the example of the report page of how we can structure that. So, of course, only an example. It's the light version, left pane navigation is available here, and there's also the top pane slicer. So we might have some drop downs here. I'm not saying that every report has to incorporate 3 slicers like here. It's only an example. So we have like the top pane with the name of the page, some additional information, for example, the currency, maybe information about the specific periods, which is important, maybe the theme selections, a few important date selections, if it's, of course, eligible on a specific report page, some slicers, clear slicers. The navigation might be on the left. It's not set in stone. Some navigations work when they are on the left, some can work when they are, for example, on the top right. There are a few different approaches. Either can be fine. We have different key strategic tiles, like the slicer selection, but not as a drop down list, but maybe more accessible for the end user. So if they don't consist of too many items, like the 3-4, like the scenario comparison, like the previous year benchmarking, etc., and it's very crucial on a report page, I might consider to use them as a drop down list comparing to the drop list as a full list, expanded list, and not a drop-down, because drop-down requires one additional click, and there might be some strategic slicers that should be visible at the first glance. So I would consider. Of course, as you can see on the mockup, there is like the simple table, additional charts. Of course, when we designing the report page, and depending on whether you create a mockup version or not, because it's not always required, but it might be beneficial, we always have to think about the storytelling, how the data in the table will correspond to the charts, how the charts will be aggregated, what will be the x-axis, the granularity of the data, what we can utilize in different sections, like the trends using the small multiples. So we all think about, like, from the different angles, how we can structure the storytelling. For example, that particular page is a different one. There is no left pane navigation here comparing to that one. The navigation is now moved to the right. It also depends on how many different sections we have and how many subsections we might have, how many filters we have. Because if we have a report which don't include many slicers, we don't necessarily have to implement additional left pane navigation, etc. So there are many different approaches to that one. One thing is that we can consider is how to maximize our space. The most space should be considered as the main section for our main core chart, tables, visualization in general. So if we don't need some space, which will stay blank because there are no slicers, we probably will have to rethink how to structure the page.
What the resolution, Gustaw?
Yeah, I will be talking about it in a second. There are some debates and discussions about it, and I will just go because I have the slides. So let me dive into that topic in a second. Here I just wanted to show you how the background may look like, and I only would like to say there are a few different approaches. There are all pros and cons. So the first one, we can bring the full-made, let's say, PowerPoint or Figma background into the Power BI. So there are specialists who prefer to use it in such way, because if we incorporate the background also potentially with the icons, etc., because now I only showing you this more like a structure. So there are only shapes here, but we can potentially also incorporate images and icons probably, and also incorporate as a template, as a background. So one of the advantages is it might be a bit better from the performance standpoint, because it doesn't have to be rendered, etc. But on the other hand, it's a little bit harder to maintain because if you have specific structure fixed in a background and you incorporate the background and the end user, or rather the BI developer who is responsible for maintenance, would like to change some sections, from my perspective, it's a little bit easier. If you, for example, incorporate a report like that, a report structure. So it's like the very basic one. It looks like nothing, to be honest. It doesn't look attractive or practical, but it works in many cases, to be honest, from my personal perspective. So we can leave the grayish kind of color as a background with some kind of the left top navigation panels or navigation panel, depending on what we need and how we would like to structure the report. And after that, we can incorporate it into the Power BI and just create white spaces, maybe with border, but it's optional. And it's very easy to like widen or decrease, increase. So it's a little bit better in terms of the maintenance, but it has to be rendered so there are more objects on the page, etc. So there are pros and cons. I will go back to that particular page, because what I also heard previously is that we can implement the Power BI template, not the template, background, either as a PNG, which is the default one, it's like the easiest one, but also as an SVG. I didn't try as an SVG, so I can't tell you whether it's a better or not option, but it's probably even better from some perspective, because from what I heard is that SVG will remain the quality of the background. So if you have it's not seen here, but let's imagine that you have like the nice shadows, nice lines or images or icons in your PowerPoint or Figma background. It might change the quality if you incorporate as a PNG. And if you incorporate as an SVG, it might remain the quality. So I didn't test it yet, but it's under my radar, and I would like to test the SVG implementation. It has probably it has to be incorporated through the HTML creator from Daniel Marsh-Patrick, or it might be created using the slicer as an SVG image, for example. But I will tell you more about it after I will finish the test. But there is a huge potential in that method, and I would like to test it, and we'll be happy with that. So my way to go at that particular moment is to go with the minimalistic approach and to leave only the grayish one, the background, with only the core elements as a section, and then I'll create additional shapes inside the Power BI. But as I said, there are a few approaches, there are pros and cons, and we have to consider a lot of different factors and pick what route you would like to use. And just to recap, remember you how that looks like in terms of how the report can be structured, it looked like that. So going from that layout, we can actually go to that particular effect. Of course, it's still created in the PowerPoint, but if we done this in Power BI, it will look more or less like that one. In terms of the resolution, there are discussions, especially lately, and there are also discussions about using the 2:1 resolution, which from some perspectives is even better than comparing here. What I would say here during our conversation is that it's generally better to use different resolution in terms of the width and height compared to the custom one, because the custom one is listed here. It's like the 720 on 1280. It's like what is the default is the default one. It's like what after launching a new page, after adding a new page in Power BI is the default section. What I would recommend is to increase the resolution. I stick to 16:9, which is, for example, 1080 to 1920. Sometimes I go even higher if that's required, so still keeping the ratio 16:9 or 9:16. But as mentioned, there are also very smart individuals who believe that 2.1 is better. So I would recommend to test both approaches, and whatever will work better for you, just stick with it, because there are pros and cons, and there are advantages and disadvantages for both. So I think that it's not completely straightforward. We have to test it more, and I also have to test it more before I will give you strict recommendation. In terms of the shape and designs, like the design of the shapes meaning like the rectangles and other things that we can add as a section. First example is like the light shade, light shadow. The second one is no shadow, only the border. And the third one is only a border but no round. It's like the squared. So squared, rounded, only border, rounded shadows, etc. I think it's not a game changer. Either we use the shadows or not, either we use the borders or not. It might either enhance the visual appealing or not. It all depends on how we can structure that in holistic way, and also on how the specific parameters we use, because the shadows might be very distant, might be like the white types of the shadows, it might be darker, lighter, etc. What I would generally recommend is to use relatively light shadows, if any. So it's not a game changer, it's not obligatory to use shadows, not at all. The main case here is just to distinguish specific sections in a report page. And we can obtain that effectively through the shadows or through the borders, or just to make it greater rectangles like the white sections. There are a few approaches. We try to declutter the sections. We try to make it as eye appealing, as light as possible. In terms of the font, just a quick information about the font. As you can see, we have a plenty of different choices in terms of the font, and font is quite in terms of the report development. There are also many more fonts in the Power BI natively available compared to that one, but I selected only a specific one. We have Dil, Sego, Kahoma, Consolas, Calibri, Arial, etc. But I would like to point a few important information. It's important that the font we choose should be monospace. It means that if we, for example, have the tables, and the tables consist of the values in most cases, the values should be aligned vertically, for example. So as you can see with the Sego, even if it's eye-appealing font type, like quotation, it has that drawback, which is very important, that it's not completely aligned when, for example, the font is bolded on subtotals, totals, and from my perspective, it's like the total disqualification of that particular font. So what we can do is we can use Dil, Arial, and Calibri. So if we exclude, also Consolas is fine. I exclude that because there are people who just don't like the visual aspects of that particular font, I mean the Consolas, but it's perfectly fine because it's like the monospace, etc. It will be aligned perfectly vertically. So it's generally it's fine. It's also a matter of how it looks like in general, in terms of the design, modern look, etc. So the Consolas will be still fine, but for the purpose of that presentation, I distinguish the Din, Arial, Din, for example, have that problem. From my perspective, it's very narrow. The font is like the subjective thing. In the past, I try to use Din as much as possible, but along the way, I switch totally to the Calibri font. So I'm not saying that Calibri is the best, not at all. Din Arial is also fine. Din, unfortunately, don't render the Polish signs effectively. So if you create a report for a Polish client, for example, there are problems with the Polish signs, which is like the disqualification of the Din. But generally, in other languages, in most cases, probably it will be fine. Also, but my way to go is Arial will be fine. My way to go is Calibri. From my perspective, it's quite elegant font and it's vertically aligned. So every important aspect of the font is addressed. And one additional thing, of course, I said that Calibri is my way to go in terms of the font, and it's natively available. However, I would like only to point out that there is also, for example, the fonts like the Arial Nova or copies. Both can be incorporated using the custom JSON templates, but there are some pros and cons. So, for example, the Arial Nova is generally available on our devices. So, if you have Word, etc., the Arial Nova is generally available. So, if the company we work for, like for our clients, would like to implement the custom template, we might incorporate the Arial Nova, for example, and it will be perfectly fine. It looks really great from my perspective. But it can be incorporated either through SVG implementation or the custom JSON template. We can fix the fonts on Arial. So I'm saying that it's an alternative to the Calibri. So if you use the custom JSON template, we might potentially use also the Arial Nova. Maybe just to test it, maybe it's like a brand group for a specific company that not everyone has the Arial Nova, but maybe some of them. So we can consider that. There's also a Poppins, which looks very elegant to my personal perspective. However, the problem is that it's not, as far as I know, it's not natively available on our devices. So we have to download this particular font on our devices. In order to be able to render these particular fonts properly, if we don't have Poppins and we adjust our JSON template to display Poppins, it will display different fonts, etc. But as an alternative to Calibri, which is available natively, so it's like the quick win. There is also Arial Nova Poppins that we might consider in some of the reports, if there will be such. Speaking about the custom theme, that is something that I'm currently testing a lot, and I would like to dive a little bit more into this topic before I give you a broader recommendation. But I generally believe that it might be to some extent a game changer in terms of how we build reports also for the clients. So as you already know, you have like the theme gallery, themes, customize current theme and save current. There are a few options in the report in Power BI. But if we don't do a lot of different things with the current theme and only press the save current theme in the Power BI, we can see that there are not specifically a lot of options that are incorporated into our JSON file. But what we can do is we can use a different theme generator, so-called, that gives you the ability, as shown here, to literally customize each of the single visualization chart, or to base on a global level functionalities. So it looks like it's a quite time-consuming, and it might be. I incorporate that on a high-level view for very specific charts, but I believe that it can be like the quite straightforward process, and I think it will be advantageous for a lot of clients who are very willing to have the branding set up. So they have the different reports across different departments, etc. All developers are preparing different reports, and they would like to incorporate one unified branding team across different sections, departments, etc. So creating one custom template might be a game changer, because as a BI developers, we might do this on a one-piece work, but it might be highly beneficial long-term for the clients. So that particular example is like the Teams PX by point. Once again, no affiliation, etc. I just use that and just sharing a piece of my experience in that case. There are also different platforms and websites. There are Teams Power BI tips like here, Enterprise DNA Power BI Team Generator, and Power BI JSON Report Team Generator by Oscar Martinez. Maybe there are a few more, but this is what I currently saw in the internet, and I would like to test Teams Power BI tips in the nearby future. So I think it might be a very good approach to create custom teams. So just wanted to share some kind of a thought, and we will be diving a little bit more into that topic. And here is just a very basic example of how the report may look like. Of course, it's not spectacular, but it doesn't have to be. The only thing that I would like to show is that it's completely built using the custom built like in a very short amount of time, because the nice thing about using the custom theme is that if you add a new visualization, which is parameterized by you, configured by you, or the new object like the shapes, it's already it has all applied the formatting, not the condition, the formatting option. So let's say you would like to create a new table. So you click the new table in a list of the core visualization, and your table will by default formatted like that, for example, depending on which formatting options you apply, because that one are applied by myself, but you can incorporate different lines, different padding, different, let's say, column header, background, etc. It's only an example, but you can customize that. And after you add a new visualization, line chart, column chart, all the titles, the subtitles, the colors for the y-axis, x-axis, the grid lines, it all can be already configured in a team JSON, so you don't have to copy paste visualization or to adjust or to use the format painter, for example. So it might be also a nice, beneficial way to save some time. Of course, there are some disadvantages because in one report page, of course, we would like to have the unified look of tables, charts, etc. But there is quite common situation where we don't have only one layout for the table. There are some specific elements that should be unified. The background for the column headers will be the same across different report pages. But in terms of the inner padding or some nuances, we might have a few different layouts that are needed in a one report page. So even if we have the custom JSON template, we only have, as far as I know, configured only one avatar, only one template set of configuration for the table or other visualization. So there might be a situation where we still, as a BI developers, have the need to adjust, make some tweaks because the JSON file doesn't cover all the specific nuances. The same with slicers. You might have different slicers depending on their function, and they might look different. But it's just an example of the report that was created quickly using the generator. So the question to you, Hugo, is that how many times you would like to proceed? Because I have a few additional pages that I would love to show you, and I have the time for that. So depending on how much time also you have, I would like to tackle that. Okay, we have time.
Take your time, mate. We have time. So, we have time. Take your time, man. Take your time.
That's great. So we still have a few.
Feel free to.
Awesome.
Feel free.
Bear with me. A few examples of the chart selection, on a very broad aspect. It's as broad aspects, but you would like to make it as simple as possible. So we have this in Power BI as BI developers. We have our tool set of visualization as shown here, but without the new card and the new slicer. Just the print screen I made and used from the Google actually was not doesn't include those specific new cards and the new slicer, but no, it doesn't. But what I would like to show you is the selection of the strategic visualization that I personally would like to put the most emphasis on. So there are several dozen different options of the core visualization, but I try to select the ones that I think takes the paramount amount of our needs in terms of the report structure. Of course, there are some nuances, but on a high level view, these are the ones that I usually the most frequently use across different reports. No matter domains, different industries, different reports, those are the most important ones. Like the different kinds of the bar charts here either stacked or clustered. Same with the column charts, either stacked or clustered. Line charts, combo charts, scatter charts, tables, matrix tables, and of course the slicers, because the slicers are the very basic component of the report page. And it to somehow relates to the chart guideline from the IBCS, of course to some extent, because it's like my personal individual selection of those slicers, but to some extent I would like to compare it to the IBCS rules. So IBCS distinguishes several types of the chart depending on what elements we would like to display. So there are the time series. You can see that in this particular column here and here, and there is a structure type of data which is best displayed using the different types of charts. But let's say we are analyzing the time series and we would like to show the data points. Data points shows me the data points means that we would like to particularly focus on a single data point. In the financials, it's quite common that we would like to see for each column per each month, for example, etc. In terms of, but not always, but just an example. In the time series, in terms of the patterns, we would like to focus not specifically on the one data points or a few data points, but rather on the patterns, long-term trends, etc. That's why we have the line charts, area charts, etc. The main case is that the time series are always in this particular horizon displayed, and there are specific selected charts that in most cases work the best. So overlapped columns, to some extent waterfalls. The native waterfalls are sometimes useful, but are also very limited to my perspective. That's why I didn't mark the waterfalls as so efficient. However, if you would like to have better waterfalls, I think waterfalls can be great, but we are lack of some core formatting options in the natives one, so we are waiting for updates in that area. But these are specific charts that are very effective in terms of showing the time series, both as the data points and as the patterns, like the more prone trends. And we have the structured type of data, which is like the, for example, the structure by customers, by localizations, etc. There are like dozens of examples, and there are different perspective usually displayed as here. No matter whether we show the structure as here or the variations as here, there is a specific pattern that we have to, that we should use.
Hierarchical analysis.
Yeah. So these are like one of the most important charts. However, of course, the left one now shows all the remaining charts that I not consider as the major ones. And of course, we can have plenty of examples where these particular charts are also important. So I'm not saying they are not important. There are use cases for probably each of them. But if I would have to spend like 80% of my focus on selected charts, I would spend my time mastering this particular charts, because there is a relatively small number of use cases, at least in my personal work, in my industries, in the financial report, for this particular report. There are specific situations where either ring chart or pie chart might be very good. Funnel charts also can be valuable. Waterfalls can be great. Lack of some options natively, but can be great. 100% stacked either bar chart or column chart in some cases are very important. But in general, these are rather not frequent use cases. Frequent chart, I would use this particular chart maybe one time over the 1,000 time, but there might be one use case where the ribbons will be best. So I'm not saying that it's not. The maps, of course, when we use the geolocalization analysis, the maps probably will be important to us. Of course, there are some limitations in the natives one. Of course, I know the map icon map is one of the very best maps, so I generally can say that, like, highlight that information, that we can consider to use the custom visualization as well in terms of the maps. However, there are some specific use cases where the maps will be suitable, even in the natives. There are gouges. I think that there are no practical use cases for gouges in terms of the old so-called old KPI cards or the multi cards. I think that one are just not so efficient as the new cards. So in general, these are replaced by the new card. So don't see many use cases for this particular chart. R, Python, I think there are many different advanced use cases, but once again, advanced. So not for everyone, not in every situation. For some, it will be inevitable, the most advantages, but it's not the most frequent use charts. The KPI cards never use it, probably never come back to that particular visualization. There are the key influencers, composition free. In some cases, might be very beneficial, but once again, quite not so frequently, to my perspective. Small narratives can be important. So to summary, to recap this particular slide, I would put the majority of my time on this particular charts, like here, but we can consider also this particular chart when it's needed, when it's the specific use case for ink chart or different chart, we can use them. But majority focus, I would put on that charts. Besides of that one, I would like to highlight that there is a new card and a new slicer which are under the development. There are a few, several adjustments that will be incorporated, which is a great thing. So the new card, the new slicer are generally good. And I would like to talk a little bit more about exactly about the KPI cards. So it will be like the last part of our today conversation, because I recently worked a lot with different layouts of the KPI cards, and I would like to show you a few different ideas that might be helpful, maybe to some extent inspirational. So in terms of the KPI cards, there are a few pros and cons, probably as always, because there are so many different formatting options that from one hand it's perfect because we can customize it on very various ways, but on the other hand it's very easy to get lost configuring all the information. So KPI cards is best comparing to all different cards that we have had so far in Power BI, but there is also this drawback related with the time consumption to configure the KPI cards. But I would like to show you a few different layouts and pieces of information regarding the KPI cards, and probably to clarify a few things, etc. So if we incorporate the KPI card in a Power BI, you can see that there is a plenty of options. We have the layout, basically how the cards will be structured, callout values, really the big numbers, the main values, and the labels. The reference labels is all the additional elements that can be placed on the bottom, for example, or to the right, left, etc. Images as an additional end card, so there's a design component of the cards. So the borders, fields, shadows, etc. If we go to the reference labels, we have to pay attention, of course, depending on whether we use the onObject. I never use onObject. I know there are files of onObject, and it probably should be better, but I personally never use onObject. So I don't have any kind of recommendation. I just fixed with the standard visual visualization pane, but it's not that I try to convince you that it's the best way. No, it's just my way in that case. However, what we have to pay attention to each of the reference labels is that either we have the selected series as all, or we selected one specific metric that we already pulled to our field in a card. Because if we have the all, there are a few additional features unlocked to be customized. But after we go to the select series and pick one specific measure that we incorporated as a reference labels, some options disappear, like the divider options, background. So we just have to be aware that some options are available depending on some clicks we either do or not in previous steps. In terms of the design, I would like to recall how we can structure, how we can build the KPI cards in the past. So these cards were built using the the smart narratives. So it's like the concatenation of one measure versus like as a text with the second measure, and there was like the enter, the break space, and we have additional information. But it was all time consuming, to be honest, and it doesn't look as efficient to my perspective compared to the KPI cards. Then we might have some workarounds using the standard old card when we can utilize, for example, the title and subtitle and the main value to create like a little bit better KPI cards with broader information within a single visualization, which to some extent and in some point of time was quite useful. But in the moment that we obtain an access to the new card, I think the new card is probably better compared to those two options. I think there might still be some use cases for the smart narratives. I'm not saying that the smart narrative is now useless, because I think it's not. But for the expression, for displaying KPI cards, probably the new KPI cards is still the best option. And the KPI cards can be designed in like dozens of ways. I just show you one specific layout here. But the funny thing is, when I'm looking at this particular cards, I'm also wondering whether it's not even better to use a table, the regular table, to display the same data. And why I'm saying that? Because I'm thinking about the KPI cards, like the new cards, in a way that the huge advantage of the new card is that we can, for example, increase the size of specific areas. So we can use the bold or increase the size or decrease the size of specific areas, which we cannot do in a table. So in a tables, everything has to be quite fixed because we don't have so much flexibility in terms of the row formatting and the column formatting. So if we use the same size of the font as here, on one hand it looks efficient because it's all vertically aligned perfectly, but in the moment there will be like different number of digits in that particular sections. What is lacking in the current version of the new card is the better options of alignment. So now it's not aligned as good as I would like to see that. So it's like the to some extent it's like the drawback of the API cards. It's not a game changer. It's not a very huge negative impact, but I would like to have better alignment properties in a new card. So it looks pretty much okay in that case, but just to give you my idea that I have in my head, I would consider also using maybe as an alternative the table comparing to that particular card, because I can now use the actuals, then I can use the absolute variances, and as a third column I can use the relative variance, and there will be perfectly aligned in a table. Maybe it will be even better options. But if we consider to use different sizes, bolds, and styles, it's the moment that the KPI card, like the so-called KPI card, because the KPI card is a different kind of visualization, like the old KPI cards. But when I'm saying the KPI cards, I'm referring to the new card, actually. So if we use a different formatting styles, we can utilize better layouts. And I would like to just, as an example, like the first example and second example, I would like to show you how we can structure and which sections we have in a KPI card. So this is the first card, second card, and this is the third. Let's focus on the first card. Firstly, we have the title. So the sample card title is the title. We have also the subtitle, sample card subtitle. Then we have the native divider. Then we have the label, which is the configuration of the callout section. We have the callout value, the main one, and we might have several reference labels. Each reference might have the title, which is bolded here, like the first reference title is the title section. Second reference title is also the title section, but for the second measure, second reference. Within the one reference, we have also the reference value and reference detail. So to recap, we have three different elements in one reference label. So we can play around and create a dozen of different layouts in a KPI card because we might utilize the title, the value, and the reference, and we don't always need each of that three elements. Sometimes we can utilize only the reference detail just to make utilization of these additional backgrounds, which, for example, is not available in the reference value. So if it's important to you to create an element which also have the conditionally formatted background, you might be better with using the reference, because in a reference value there is no such thing as a conditionally formatted background, etc. So there are different options. The second card is the same as the first one, but with the one small difference that we have now the label on the bottom compared to the color value. So color value is on the top, label name is on the bottom. Here label is on the top, color is on the bottom. So like the two different visualization and two different layouts, but like the minor. And that particular example is built using only one card. So we can see how many different elements and sections we can utilize only using a single object. Because now we don't even use the subtitle as here, we only use the title. Then we have the callout value, we have the label, then we have an image. Image can be dynamic if you would like to. We have the title of the reference, value of the reference, and the detail. Because here was the structure like the horizontal one when we have like title, value, and the reference, and the detail. And here is like the structure vertical. So we have the title here, here is the value, and here is the reference. These are just an example of how we can build structure KPI card depending on the context. And here are
in some cases, this new card is a dashboard itself. In some cases, this new card is a dashboard itself.
Yeah.
We don't need.
Yeah, I hear you.
You understand?
Yeah. So
Sorry.
we can, yeah, of course, we can use a few KPI cards, and it's like the it's like the report itself because it gives you information about the variance, for example. There is also an additional point of view that calls for using spark lines, timelines, or the different charts to make it to show you the scale, for example, of the variance, etc., which you can see in a KPI card. But it's also true that in some cases the KPI card with the specific conditional formatting or the so-called, I'm not remember how it's called, but Nick Debra had a great article on how to create like the signals, the signs, whether something is good or bad, but not align, not to be applied to each element, to each role, to each KPI card, but only to those ones who are really important, either in a negative way or the positive way. So there is like the gradiented signs, like different shades of green, different shades of red. So I didn't test it yet, but just from reading that article, I think it's amazing because green and red as here is like the very great step forward, but I think we can still have some room of improvement. And on the other hand, at the end of the day, not everything is very easy to create in a Power BI. So, for example, the advices from Nick Debra might be the best. On the other hand, it's not everything. Not everything is achievable very easily in Power BI. Something can require workarounds, DAX solutions, etc. But the idea of using signs, I think, is brilliant. Now we are focusing on a new native card, so I'm only showing you what we can build using the native card. So here we have the two comparisons. And it's actually also important distinction because what I'm showing you here is like the card with two separate benchmarks. We have the benchmark to the previous year and the benchmark to the budget in that case. But it's always important to distinguish and to determine what the card will be consisted of, because in some cases you might have only one benchmark, only previous year, only budget, only target, whatever. In some cases we might have a few, maybe two, maybe three more. I think it will be maybe over clutter, but let's say the two or three. So depending on how many different benchmarks we have, we also think of how we can structure our KPI cards. In that particular case, we have some kind of title, it's like the metric name, revenues, gross margin. Then we might have some additional information. It's not obligatory. It's not like we always have to utilize subtitles because in some cases, what we require is only the title and it's perfectly fine. In some cases, we might also include the subtitle. What I would like to show here, it's not shown here actually, but I would like to give you a second thought about it. We would rather try to pack similar information in a specific section area. So for example, if we have the sample date across each KPI card, maybe it would be better to exclude the subtitles and instead incorporate the date which is selected above each card, not above each of them, but rather create one common section which will have like one common title, one common subtitle. Maybe the sample, the date selected will be seen in a subheader of the page. The same with unit. We might incorporate it's for example in 1,000 USD, but the 1,000 USD also might be incorporated in the subheader of the title, and it might be enough, and we can omit the redundancy using all the same information across all the KPI cards. So we have to strategically use what additional information we'd like to use. Then we have the callout value. In that case, is the actuals. We have the previous year. So the names like the previous year and the budget is like the titles of the reference. Then we have the values, and of course we can see now that there is no such nice alignment comparing to the previous version, because we can see that now there is a small offset vertically, which is not perfect, which is not perfectly optimized, but it is what it is. And then we have the reference labels. It's either the value or either the detail, depending on whether we would like to use the background or not. There is no background, so it can be either the value or the reference detail, and it's built using the single DAX formula. So I will show the DAX formula later on, but it's like the concatenation of the absolute variance with the relative. But once you get the template DAX for that particular use case, you can utilize it across different metrics, and it's quite straightforward to leverage. And one thing that I would like to highlight here is the two cards with direct costs. But what you can see here is here's the basic one, I can say. But what is not exactly right here is the color of the variances, because you can see that we have the actual 51.9 millions, and the previous year was 40, and it's like the plus 11. In that case, it's signed with the green color, additional promo, which is not actually what we want, because if the actuals was higher than the previous year in terms of the direct cost, for example, it actually should be red in that case. And if, for example, we have the budget, we have like the lower actuals comparing to the budget, of course, there are some nuances, but in most cases, it should be as a positive sign, because we might have some savings. So this particular card shows that with direct cost, there is like the invert variance that, of course, we have to implement through the DAX, but we have to be conscious that if we, for example, have the switch-based KPI cards, so we might have this one switch measure, which gives you the ability to show either revenues, gross profit, or gross margin. At the same time, depending on what you select on the slicer or in a filter pane. You might also have, for example, the direct cost in a list of selection. So you have to consider the DAX-based formula to cover that specific scenario. And if it's the cost, we would like to implement the inverted colors or variances. So it's an important thing to consider. Of course, if we implement the KPI cards only for the cost categories, it will be more straightforward, because there is no mix of the revenue type, result type of metrics with the cost type of metrics, which requires inverted colors, meaning for variances. Here are a few additional layouts of the KPI cards. That one is just aligned to the top. So previously they are aligned to the left. This one are aligned to the top. Just an additional example. That one, for example, utilize additional icon, as also shown in the previous slides. There is a title like impressions, engagement rate, new followers, additional icon. We see the actuals. Maybe in that case is like the selected period. So we analyze the last 90 days. So the 90 days was, for example, a particular value, and it was the comparison to the analogical period, but not in a previous last year period, but in that case prior period. So we are comparing 90 days to the previous 90 days in that case, exactly as it works in a LinkedIn basic stats. So we can see a different layouts of the KPI cards. And one additional idea that I would like to share with you, once again, it's not a game changer, but sometimes it can improve the storytelling, is that we can actually cover the KPI cards with the new slicer. And it might give you a nice interactive way of switching different visualization across the report, like let's say the simple line chart, like here as an example. Of course, it's a static version, so I cannot click that, but the idea is that we can overlap the slicer, which has the transparent background, and only the outline, for example, as a design is visible when something is selected. And you can just click on impressions, average engagement rate on all the new followers, and all the different information across the report page will reflect. So it's a niche technique. It won't be used frequently, but in some cases, the ability to show the client, the end user, the metrics, like here, like the key KPIs, and at the same time, you can filter the data using the clicking on a single card. It might be very user-friendly. Here's a different thing, different layout in the combination of the line, because as I tested a few different layouts of the KPI cards, I thought that it would be beneficial to supplement the KPI card itself, additional charts like the line charts, volume charts, etc. In that case, we can have like the dynamic metric selection, dynamic period, but it's irrelevant in that case. What is relevant is how we can structure the KPI cards, because the different layouts. Now we have the title, we have the divider, and we skip the callout values and the labels, and we go strictly to the reference values. So this is using the reference value itself without call out section in the KPI cards. So I'm only showing you that we have like plenty of different configuration that we can use to create the KPI cards as you would like to. And in that case, you can see that the background is actually also conditional formatting because it's based on a detail section, so-called detail section. There is also a bit lighter grayish color for the prior period. It's not like the game changer once again, but there's like the design elements that we can incorporate. A few additional designs of the KPI cards. Like additional hints that I thought about some time ago and I would like to share with you is that we have to carefully pick the charts. Of course, these are like the same, let's say there are a few minor differences, but let's say that this card shows you a bit similar thing. That one is using the column, it's like the combo chart because the per period information, like the lighter columns are the columns and we have the median and the rolling average as lines. So it is the combo chart. And that one is unfortunately not visible enough because there is a tooltip appearing, but strategically, but this is the pure line chart. What is the difference between? If you'd like to have the ability to apply the conditional formatting, it might be beneficial to use the columns because we have the ability to use the conditional formatting on columns. So if you would like to highlight specific periods or to specific values, you can use the columns. But the small disadvantage from my perspective is that there is not so user-friendly way to utilize the tooltips. Because if you'd like to see the value for specific time period and you have like the more granular data, you have to be very careful to click, like to hover over the specific data points, which is quite more user-friendly in terms of the line chart. Because of course it's not visible here because the fixed object is an image. But the nice thing about line chart is that you have the additional vertical line when the tooltip appears and it matches all one single data point and gives you like the whole spectrum of information. The three metrics are visible within the single tooltip. Of course, we can manually add additional metrics to the tooltips here, but the main thing is that it's quite good user experience in a line chart that is like the very smooth transition when you move to the different data points compared to the combo chart. Of course, if the combo chart would have less amount of data periods, it might be also user-friendly, but in that case, the line chart might be a better option. And here is an additional comparison, the same cards, the same layouts, but that one with the background, that one without the background. No big deal, not a game changer. If you would like to highlight a little bit more the variances, you might utilize the additional background, but I think without background is still fine. So I only would like to show you that there is a possibility to use the different background conditional formatted background, but it's not a huge difference. In terms of how we can incorporate different things, just some kind of the guideline. So once again, the new slicers, the blank cards that might include additional major titles, subtitles, and a few things. We can also conditionally format the title, so we can utilize the title itself to create the element of the signals, whether it's something the positive or the negative. We might use the conditionally formatted values, but we also incorporate the conditionally formatted titles. Once again, we have a lot of different options. We might consider which will work the best in our cases. The same here is like the breakdown, divider, first reference labels. Here is the second reference labels. So different sections as previously discussed. And here is the sample measure. It's actually the only one measure to cover this specific use cases. But don't worry, it looks a little bit scary, maybe to some extent. But it all depends on how many different scenarios you have to be addressed depending on your core KPI card. The main thing about this KPI card is a bit of a nuance because the average engagement rate is displayed as a percentage. So if there is a variance displayed for the percentage, we should show the variances as a percentage points, not as a percentage as itself, but as a percentage points. So sometimes the formula can be much more complex if we have to utilize a different scenarios. So as I previously mentioned, if you have, it's not that particular use case, but if you like, you would have the revenues and the expense type of categories, we have to additionally adjust the variances, for example, the sign, the inverted variance cost categories. Here is a different thing, different use case when we have to simultaneously address the percentage points for the percentage type of metrics or the absolute and relative variances for non-percentage types. For example, total impressions is non-percentage, it's like numeric value. So it's like a little bit complex, more complex formula because of the switch function that I have implemented, because I have a few different metrics that can be dynamically selected. So that's why it's so complex. But if we would like to make it as simple as possible, we can just keep all the pieces of information that are now grayed out. Of course, we can also exclude the comments, so the formula will be even shorter. But the main idea here, not going into, maybe we will go to the details. Why it's so common? What is the basic one? Here is the metric, absolute metric, relative. So we have to calculate what is the absolute variance and the relative variance in order to be able to display that as a card. It's like a fixed thing. However, there are a few things that might be optional. We don't have to use that as complex way as it is here, but it's like an additional way of using the DAX here. So we might use the predefined formats. These formats can be implemented in either as a variables, for example, but alternatively, if we have like the dozens of similar measures, we can also store them, let's say, in a different table. And we can also address not the specific fixed in a brackets text, but we can also retrieve the information from the table. So if you change the formats in a main table, it will affect all your formatting options across several or dozen measures. So we can incorporate as a variable, we can take a different approach and use the one master file formats and use the correspondence to those tables. There are different options, but let's say we would like to make it as a variable, because as we have that in a variable, we can refer that in a later sections. We can use the define local format if that's important. We can also incorporate the information that whether the metric is above some threshold, you can incorporate formats like the millions or thousands, for example. And it's absolutely optional, because there might be use cases, there might be clients that would like to show the data, for example, only in thousands and not express it dynamically. So depending on what is the scale, what is the value itself, you might dynamically change it to the millions or to the billions or thousands, etc. But it's not always needed nor required. Sometimes we have to fix all charts, all information across a specific report only on one specific format. But there is that particular case show you the more flexible approach, because it's that for my personal usage, it's like my own data from the LinkedIn, and I wanted to incorporate the dynamic version of, depending on what the threshold is, I would like to express it either in millions or thousands. It was my personal requirement. In the business-wise reports, it all depends. There are some selected value options because we would like to know what is the selected metric, etc. It's still, of course, optional, because I had to check whether the metric is percentage type or not percentage type. That's why I have more selected value incorporated into the measure, but it's totally optional and depending on the context. We might use the different signs. Let's say that the triangle, it might be like the circle or many different objects. In my case, I use the triangles. And then we have the switch. I have the more complex scenario because I have the period selection. And when I selected show me all the information, I didn't want to express any kind of variance, because I currently showing all the dates. So I don't want to show any variances, because There is no like the last 7 days comparing to the previous 7 days. It's like, show me all. I don't want to see any variances. If the metric is 0, you can retrieve, for example, no change sentence. Depending on your context, I would like to see whether it's a percentage or not. And if it was the percentage type of metric, I multiplied it by 100 in order to obtain the specific number of the percentage point. And then I was adding the triangle up or triangle down, depending on the sign of the variance, whether it's positive, whether it's positive value or the negative value. And the fallback, so-called, what we would like to incorporate if those previous conditions are not met. In that case, we are formatting the metric absolute. We have the format absolute switch. Let's say we use the format absolute switch. Is that one? So it expressed which will be the format here, and the local. And if the metric relative is not blank, because in some cases it might be blank, if it's not blank, give me additional sign which separate absolute from the relatives. And if the relative is not blank, show me the relative, respective to the specific format relative. Format relative is shown here, and then I was adding the sign. But as I said, if you have the less complex scenario, you would end up with much narrower formula, which is quite replicable, and we can use that with different scenarios. There are also different things that are also DAX-based from some extent, from some perspective, unfortunately, because it all involves additional steps. However, we can also utilize DAX in order to change the font color or the background color, so we can make it conditionally formatted. We can store the positive variance color as a hex code in a fixed, not a fixed, but in a separate measures, and we can call for them in a different measure. So instead of using the hex code here inside the measure, inside the conditional formatting, I would rather retrieve a different measure, because if I decided that my positive should be different green, different shades, or the red should be different, and etc., I don't have to come back to specific measures and switch or use the different views of the DAX query, etc. I can just change it in my main measure, which is responsible for different colors for different scenarios. So we can either use a different color, conditional formatting, and we can, but it's like the inception, it's like the very high level of complexity. We can also use the conditionally formatted value decimal places. So it might be the case where we would like to display no decimal places, and there might be a situation where we would like to display decimal places. Let's say we analyze the HR metrics and we would like to show you maybe not the FTEs, but the headcount as a fixed number without decimals. It's like 70 people, let's say, or number of followers. And we don't want it to see like decimal places like the 0, because like the full number, let's say 500. So we can potentially also incorporate DAX-based conditionally formatted number of decimal places, which can be incorporated here per decimal place. But it requires additional steps. It's maybe not recommended, but it's like the very high level of complexity. If you would have to like format DAX base all of the information, you would end up with very complex report, hard to maintain, etc. So for specific use cases, I would only like to highlight that we have potentially such opportunities, such abilities, but it's not always what we actually need in the reports. And it's actually everything for today. I think 1 hour more than we probably assumed, but it was a great time, to be honest, and it was great opportunity to meet you. So I think that's fine.
Man, you're amazing. Man. We have some questions. Gustavo Leo. We often see many colorful and fancy dashboards, especially in Brazil, that convey only a small fraction of information.
Understood.
Certainly, the excessive use of color and the number of visuals on a single canvas significantly increases the cognitive effort required to understand and use the dashboard on a daily basis. What tests do you typically run to balance the amount of information on a dashboard?
I only rely on my personal eye, to be honest, in that case. So I always trying to investigate and subjectively estimate what is the level of clutter of the specific reports, and I generally try not to use too many colors. I know there are some specific tests. Actually, a good friend of mine from the team of Entering use one specific test to evaluate the number of colors on a specific report pages, and it gives you an information whether it's too much or not. So I can just ask how the specific tool is called, and I will revert back, because indeed there are some tools that gives you the information, the indicator. So if there are some, I think it might be beneficial to use them. In my case, it's just the case of the iterations and the revert back and the feedback from the clients, along with my personal subjective opinion.
Go ahead. Some joke.
I've heard it recently.
Oh, yeah. André Jar, how do you see the usage of HTML visuals in your dashboards?
Never use it. I mean, I don't recommend to never use it, but I personally never used that so far. So far as I saw, there were people who create amazing interactive features with the HTML creator, which are not natively available. Where, for example, you can hover over the KPI cards and the KPI cards flips, and there is different information, etc. A lot of animation things. So there might be a few different use cases for that one. I never used it. I know that the HTML creator allows you to use the HTML scripts, for example. So I think that might be a good utilization for implementing the SVG backgrounds to the report page, what I mentioned today, but I have to dig deeper into that one.
Oh, André,
the only thing I used so far was the SVG, but SVG is not particularly related with the HTML creator from Daniel, so I can only rely on my so far experience with the SVG, because HTML was not under my scope.
O André que está acompanhando a gente aí, falar em português agora aqui rapidamente. O André também é daqui, né? Eu também não vejo não aprecio o uso nem de SVG, na verdade, tá? Porque a gente sempre acaba tendo problema de implementação por causa de regras de segurança de ambiente, sempre tem alguma coisa que leva o recurso a não funcionar corretamente, frustra o cliente, frustra a gente, e a gente fica com uma situação desconfortável, tá? Eu sou sempre adepto de fazer a entrega com aquilo que é nativo da ferramenta, com aquilo que eu sei que não vai dar problema, independente de como está configurado o ambiente do cliente, e com isso a gente vai ter aí um resultado que possa ser apreciado, tá, André? We have one more question.
Thank you for translation, Hugo. Just wanted to add one additional comment. I think that Jefferson Alves constantly, on a regular basis, creates amazing features based on HTML, as far as I know. He combined SVG and HTML, and some features that he come up with are amazing. So I suppose you probably know him, maybe even the person who asked the question, maybe also is familiar with who the Jefferson Alves is, but I really recommend his work as well, just to get an idea what is actually using different methods in Power BI.
Ele citou também, pessoal, aí o trabalho que o Jefferson Alves faz, né? Para quem não acompanha também, o Jefferson Alves tem bastante conteúdo lá no LinkedIn, principalmente, especialmente utilizando aí SVG e HTML, né? Para compor aí as soluções. E eu recomendo também, aproveito a deixa, né? E por que não, né? Vou recomendar o trabalho também, um dos caras que foi pioneiro disso aqui no Brasil, que é o Luiz Gustavo Nascimento Serra, né? Que foi um dos caras que, em primeiro lugar, trouxe esse tipo de aplicação para cá, utilizando em português, tá? E foi no trabalho do Luiz Gustavo que muita gente, como o próprio Jefferson Alves, se baseou aí, né? Para criar também o seu próprio conteúdo posteriormente, tá, pessoal? When will Gustaw create a design course to create a report? Come on, man.
That's a very good question. Just wanted to highlight a small information that I have in my mind of one major heavy initiatives for the nearby future, but I will reveal more details soon because I would rather make it first and then I would like to share that information instead of the reverse direction. It won't be the course, so I can't promise it will be in the nearby future because I have different initiatives that I would like to invest my time on, and I know that such course will take some time. But I will do my best to share as much practical tips and knowledge as I can. And on the top of that, I would like to incorporate one additional initiative. I will keep you informed.
You follow. Vinícius Francisco de Oliveira. Is this culture of advanced cards with such details something commonly requested, or was it something you had to introduce to your end users?
Good question. So basically, I would say that it's generally requested to implement specific API cards, and we were never requested for the specific layouts. So the layouts are created by ourselves depending on how we would like to structure the KPI card. So we not necessarily invent, but think about the different ways of structuring and layout, creating a layout for KPI cards. But for example, using the different sections for the variance is quite typical in our financial reports. So we probably never had the occasion to just create a single call-out value KPI cards. There's almost always a need to use some kind of the benchmarks, and the KPI cards in many cases are still a valuable thing for end users, because to some extent we can incorporate a lot of information using the timelines, the tables, etc. But it's still needed for the end users to have a quick insight into the card, which is relatively big. It's placed in a specific place in the report. So I would say that KPI card is still live, and it was, as I mentioned, not requested in a specific level as I presented, but we have like the request to showing for showing specific variants, etc. So we have to do our best to create such layout that answer those questions.
How do you decide which date slicer option to display on the report?
Mm-hmm. Always depends on what is actually in a slicer. Because if we deal with the period selection, which has to be single select, it's self-explanatory that it has to be single select. So my first thought is always what I would like to achieve using the specific filters. Should the action filter many different things like the multi-select, or it should be single? So it will be my first thing what I would like to incorporate. Second thing is that I also think about whether the slicer will be placed on a dark dim element or the light dim element, because if we have like dark dim paints, which are of course not necessary, but if someone created left or top pane as a dark dim, as a dark color field background, for example, let's say you have the single select or even the multi-select drop-down is over the full list old slicer, so your selections won't be never visible enough. Even you have the small checkboxes with the, because in an old native slicers you might have two different options, whether the selection is with the control or without the control. So if you don't have necessarily pick the control, you have the small checkbox when you select specific items. So the white check mark will be visible even on a dark mode, but generally I do not try to incorporate slicers on a dark dim, which are the old ones. So I would rather stick with the new ones if it's implemented on a dark dim, but it still depends on the number of selectable options, because it only ties with the new. So it's like the ties, the sections in a slicer. It's not like the drop down. There's no new slicer with a drop down, etc. So if we have relatively small number of items to be selected, I might consider to use the new slicers. Sometimes we might use the drop down. It also impacts the performance. So there are a few factors. Sometimes you wouldn't like to incorporate the slices on the page. You would like to pack them on a pop-up window, for example. So there are different nuances. Sometimes you might need the search function, so we have to respect also that functionality. So it always depends on the functionality of the slicer, what we would like to achieve by using those slicers. Sometimes the most strategic and with relatively small number of items slicers can be as not a drop down list, but as a list, the visible one, because it gives the user the quick information what is selected, and gives you the quick ability to select different options compared to drop downs. But there are always pros and cons, and it's like the conceptualized.
We talk about the new card. Talk a lot about the new card. What do you think of the new slicer that came after the new card?
Mm-hmm.
A few time after the new card, we received the new slicer.
Mm-hmm.
I'm still learning to work with them. What do you think about them?
Good question, Hugo. I think I can point to main negative sides of the slicer that I noticed, and one advantage. So starting with disadvantages, one thing that it's quite painful is that we are not able to dynamically change the look of the slicer depending on how many items are in a current state on our report page. So if we fix the slicer on 4 and currently we have 3, it won't look good, because, for example, it will be stretched, etc. It won't maintain the actual design that we mentioned, we had in our mind. So the inability of the slicer to adjust the width of the single rectangles is a little bit annoying to some extent from the visualization standpoint. And one thing that it's lack in a new slicer, which also was not available in the old one, unfortunately. It was available in the chiclet slicer, but not in the natives one, was the force selection. And it's not the force selection which is available in the new slicer, because there is an option which is called force selection, but it's the different functionality compared to the force selection in the chiclet slicer. And I mean by that the ability of the slicer to automatically pick the first, let's say from the top list, first item when anything is available within the different category, within a different selection. And it's often misleading, and it creates some awkward, strange, non-optimal scenarios when we don't have such option to force selection. It will be very, very beneficial. We might obtain that effect using the field parameters, but it's quite complex functionality, and it's like the workaround. So it would be better to have it natively. But generally, what is nice is that it's quite nice looking. We can incorporate images in some cases. It's still a niche technique in my perspective. We don't necessarily frequently need images like the person, headshot, etc. It looks like in specific report pages, but not every time. But the general design that we can structure our slicer, which looks as a navigation button, we can really make a good-looking design for those slicers, which looks eye-appealing, works good. So I think that it's better having the new slicer compared to not having that. And I know it's still in the adjustment phase, so there will be a lot of different adjustments to the new slicer, which gives you better options. Like it would be nice to have like the hierarchical slicer, have like ability to only pick single select from the leaf category, meaning from the parent child hierarchy item, and not necessary to the higher categories. So only the higher categories will create a category, but it's not selectable, but you can select something which is under it. It would be nice, but it probably will be in the future, but for that we have such development phase. But generally, I think it's good that it's incorporated. There's a lot of different good use cases. It looks good. It creates a good user experience when designed in a proper way. So generally, it's good. But generally, generally the slicers are limited. So I would really like to have a lot of different options in terms of the slicers, but we have to wait.
More comments. The new slice has some nice tick box selection format.
That's also true. If you're referring to having like pretty full, easy to implement checkboxes like different dots at different signs, it would be phenomenal. Because using the images and different workarounds, it's achievable, but sometimes there is challenges with the displacement, with the alignment, padding, etc. We have to like make some additional developmental work to make it work nice. But having like the tick boxes, etc., natively in your slicer will be phenomenal. I think it's on the list. It will be probably incorporated in the future. But generally, great idea. It would be great.
That's amazing, man. We had a great webinar this afternoon here in Brazil. As I say sooner, I have no words to express how happy I am to have you here. God bless you. God bless anyone who had become with us this afternoon. One more comment before we finish.
That's also true. There is no formatting options in a drop-down list, etc. So hard to do anything with that in terms of the design standpoint.
Thank you. Right.
Thank you.
As we say to you have many fans here in Brazil, much more than you think. Your work is very appreciated here.
Really nice to hear. Thank you very much. We appreciate it.
And I'm really happy with this. Okay, all right.
Great meeting you.
My
Great
good friend,
keep
with your good work, keep your hard work, keep with the contents that makes greater the career of everyone who follow your profile. We finish. Thank you. Thank everyone. God bless you all.
Thank you, everyone. Cheers. Have a great day.